My name is Rick Moldenhauer. I'm with the Behavioral Health Division, Minnesota Department of Human Services. I'm with the government. I'm here to help. I can't say it with a straight face either. Miles and some other people on the committee asked me to come here today and spend a little time with you going through what is probably kind of a poignant yet depressing part of your afternoon. So my role in this today is to spend some time giving a pictorial or giving a testament through statistics, numbers, and a few other things, what is the day-to-day existence of the world that we all operate in, specifically yourselves. So I come to you from the Behavioral Health Division. My world is substance use disorder treatment. And along with that, and then a few other things, the presentation I have for you is broken basically into three chunks. We're going to talk a little bit about drug trends and patterns. Then we're going to talk a little about the mortality of drug trends and patterns. And then I can't talk about drug trends and patterns and mortality, especially with the audience and with the focus of what we're here to talk about, without talking about stigma, which is a huge driver of why this keeps happening. So this is me. This is my shameless self-promotion slide. Everything that I'm going to have in here is public domain. If you want a copy of this slide deck, it's yours for the asking. The easiest way to get a hold of me is at this email address here, richard.moldenhauer@state.mn.us. You're going to hear me make a lot of references today about different sources of information, different pieces of information, et cetera, et cetera. If you have any questions about it, have any clarifications, again, please feel free to get a hold of me. I've been with the Behavioral Health Division for about 22 and a half years. So I've got 22 and a half years worth of presentations and slides and data and PowerPoints. None of that does anybody any good sitting on my hard drive gathering desk. So I'm more than willing to give out anything I got that's going to be useful or helpful to you. So please, if you have any questions, ask. Okay. I do also maintain what I call an opioid interest email distribution list off my desktop. So the kind of stuff you're going to see me talk about here today, stats, slides, figures, facts, current trends, patterns, any of that stuff, anything that you want to get kind of the inside scoop on new releases, state, federal, international stuff, send me an email and just ask to be put on the opioid distribution email list. There's about 600 people on it right now. And that's any of a variety of people, from street outreach workers to physicians at the University of Minnesota. So it's just a quick, easy way for me to be able to get information out to a lot of people at the same time. And it's a variety of stuff. If it's something that is completely boring to you, Control-Alt-Delete. If it's something that's of interest and use to you, everything I send out is public domain. Use it for what you can. So we're going to start by talking about trends and patterns, what we're seeing statewide, and then stretch that out to region and to national for substance use. So the way that we measure this in Minnesota is through this process. Have you ever heard of DANES? D-A-A-N-E-S. If you're unfamiliar with it, DANES is the Drug and Alcohol Abuse Normative Evaluation System. It's our method of data collection for what goes into TED's Treatment Episode Data Set, which is a requirement of the federal government. So, behold, the beautiful land of Minnesota, 32nd state inducted it into the Union, star of the North, home of 87 counties, 11 federally recognized tribes, 86,943 square miles, a relatively new stadium, not one damn Super Bowl ring yet. Not that we're bitter about it. Scattered throughout Minnesota, as of today, we have about 465 licensed 245G or substance use disorder treatment programs, about 3 dozen tribally licensed SUD programs, 14 or 15 detoxes, about 16 withdrawal management, and a smattering of other credentials. Whenever someone is admitted to any of these programs, we have this big long list of questions that we ask. Age, race, gender, socioeconomic status, veteran status, primary, secondary, tertiary drug route of administration, yada, yada, yada. And so out of that, we have this monolithic database that goes back to 1987. So what you're going to see here in the first chunk of this presentation is treatment admission data. And I want to stress that we're extrapolating out of treatment admission data prevalence of use data. The important difference to understand is treatment admission data are people that are in the right place at the right time with the right funding source, where there's a residential bed or an outpatient slot available for them. These numbers do not include the de facto detox that is the back of the squad car or the holding cell, does not include emergency room, does not include mortality. Some of that stuff will come later. Depending whose math you look at, NIDA, SAMHSA, they'll tell you anywhere from 1 in 4 to 1 in 7, 1 in 10 people that could benefit from some form of service delivery are actually able to receive it for whatever reason. So when we talk about prevalence, how much is being used in what parts of the state by what groups of people, you can take the trends, you can take the raw numbers, you can take the percentiles here, you can double them and still probably be in a conservative estimate. So just keep in mind that this is people that were lucky enough to get into the system somehow, somewhere through some source. With me so far? Okay, so a lot of the stuff you're gonna see here is canned DANES data. I've got mountains of this kind of stuff. So if you have a need for numbers and stuff, send me an email. We've got numbers, again, to go back to 1987. So if you're writing for grants, if you're writing for RFPs, if you've dealt with the state before, you know we like numbers. We're kind of into that sort of stuff. We're like the Uber nerds. Or what would happen if Ted Nugent and House MD had a child together? Well, I am. So if you need numbers for applications, get a hold of me. We'll dig up what we can for you. So again, we're talking about treatment admission data. It's a subset of prevalence. So what we're going to do is we're going to start looking back 1995, because we got to start somewhere, and we're going to roll through calendar year 2021. These are treatment admission data. And then we're going to start to break this down by a couple of different trends and patterns and demographics. In the next couple of slides, you're going to see the same style of format. It'll go by calendar years, it'll go by raw treatment admission numbers, and then I want to point out some of the trends that are going on. The primary thing that I want you to keep in mind here is when we look at these next few slides, everything from 2020, 2021, and even some of the initial stuff for 2022, all has to be taken with the understanding that COVID fundamentally changed everything. You had treatment centers that stopped taking admissions. You had treatment centers that closed. You had a whole variety of things that started to happen. So with lack of accessibility for treatment, you see an incredible increase in overdose. The reason you see a lot of overdose is because there was no interventions available. Through no fault, through no other purpose, then there simply wasn't an availability of treatment services at that time. So do not construe what you're going to see as this sudden drop in 2020, 2021 as somehow a bursting ball of abstinence happened in Minnesota. It didn't. It's lack of the ability for people to get into service. So as a general statement, you're going to notice that there's a slight reduction here starting about 2010 down for this blue line, the adolescents, and there is an increasing escalation for the adults. What I want you to keep in mind is for these purposes, we define an adolescent as 0 to 18, 17, etc. Adults are 18 and over. So when you look at this with that thought in mind, it's not so much that adolescents are decreasing and adults are increasing. There's a lot of recidivism where people that were coming into the system as adolescents are reappearing into the system, readmissions as adults. So when you see the overall total line mirrors almost exactly the adult line, it's because we have more and more people coming in, recidivists, readmissions. If we would have had this discussion 15 or 20 years ago, the average age for first presentation and treatment was somewhere in the early to mid 30s. Today it's about 24. So we have literally dropped about a decade for first admission age set. Back in the old days, we would have people that would come in that were single, maybe a couple of substance use, a couple of different substances being used. Remember Mayberry RFD? I'm aging myself here right now. If you ever watched Mayberry RFD, remember Otis the Town Drunk? The guy who would go check himself into jail every Friday night to save Andy the time of chasing his ass around Raspberry. Those guys are gone. Polysubstance is just what it is now. We don't even ask just a substance. We ask primary, secondary, tertiary. So in today's world, the average is a 24-year-old first presentation or younger. Polysubstance is the rule, it's not the exception. We also see a dramatic increase in comorbidity, both mental health and physical problems. AIDS is on the pickup again. Hepatitis is an explosion, and a lot of mental health stuff coming in. The two that we see more and more all the time are an opioid use disorder with generalized anxiety disorder as a secondary mental health diagnosis. If you've ever seen somebody in opioid withdrawal looks a lot like generalized anxiety disorder. And when you work with our clientele, you've probably noticed that sometimes they're not the best historians. So they show up in the emergency room at 2 o'clock in the morning. They have a symptom presentation that looks for all the world like generalized anxiety disorder. The gold standard in medical care for generalized anxiety is an anxiolytic medication, Xanax and Klonopin, Prozac, clonazepam being the two real popular ones. So we see 50, 60% of people coming in with an OUD that have a PRN prescription for Xanax or Klonopin, because when they come into the other mental health or the other medical door, they don't talk about the opioid, they talk about, and the clinician sees mental health. My point simply being is that people coming into the system today are far more complex and complicated than they used to be. When we start talking about primary substance, so this is the same process, 95 to 2021, and again, anything in 20 and 2021, take with a COVID-based grain of salt. So throughout Minnesota, and this is all populations, all admissions, we are a Weinstein kind of state. We like to drink, Skoll. That's this big line you see up here, that's alcohol. As a general statement, has been, will forever be, probably forever be for adults, the primary substance. So what I want to do to give you some more detail is we're going to take this exact same slide. I'm going to remove alcohol and then expand the details down here so you can see a little better what's actually going on. Same slide, alcohol is taken off. I want you to take a gander at methamphetamine. 2004, 2005, the height of the last methamphetamine wave in Minnesota. Even at its height here, 2004, 2005, methamphetamine as a primary substance only accounted for about 16% of all treatment admissions, but it got all the press, it got all the funding, it got all the action around it. So we got busy putting pseudoephedrine behind the counter. We got busy creating the methamphetamine register and offender registry, the Clan Lab Task Force, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you start to see methamphetamine admissions go down. You're starting to move into 2008, 9, and 10. And one of the presenters this morning was talking about this, where you start to see a large increase in pharmaceutical opioids, or for our purposes, what are called other opioids. Vicodin, Percodan, Percocet, OxyContin, Hydromorphone, Dilaudid, Darvocet, and the rest of the narcotic Scooby snack and buffet line. Around the same time, 08, 09, in medicine, in medical care, they started talking about pain as a fifth vital sign. So if you're anywhere in the baby boomer Gen X range, one of the things you probably noticed is your reward for waking up every morning is something hurts. And so in medical care, there was a big push to have pain be a fifth vital sign. What's unique about pain is it's a uniquely subjective experience. You come into healthcare, we can take your blood pressure, we can take your pulse, your temperature, all that other stuff. But when we take pain measurements, we show you a bunch of emojis, we give you a scale of 1 to 10, and we say, based on this scale of 1 to 10, something is only mildly annoying, something really hurts, tell us how you feel. And that is a uniquely subjective experience. That's why one person can go to the dentist and get just drilled with no Novocaine, and the next person passes out when they even think about it. So pain is uniquely subjective. So in this time frame, you start to see an increase in prescriptions and dispensing of pharmaceutical opiates. And there's an important delineation to draw here. Along with that increase in prescription and dispensing of opiates, you see an increase in people that develop a physical dependency to an opioid medication, not an addiction. There is an important fundamental difference. Physical dependency and addiction can be two different things. So you have people that now you're moving into 2014, 15 in that time frame. The first wave of methamphetamine has kind of ran its course. Now we need to have something new to get excited about. So we start, oh my God, pharmaceutical opioids, the next scourge, the next pill epidemic, the next everything that's going to be bad and horrible. So gets press, gets money. And we start doing things like rescheduling certain medications, moving them from Sched 4 to Sched 3, 3 to 2. individual practitioners, large healthcare chains start to look at their prescriptive practices around painkillers in particular. So they start to substitute and taper down. They start to use a less potent version or try to switch off opiates to other non-opioid based pain management. So people start to go into withdrawal. They have developed a physical dependency, but do not fit a DSM diagnosis of addiction. You start to go into withdrawal. You ever been in opioid withdrawal? You ever seen anyone in opioid withdrawal? That sucks. And you're going to get busy trying to not be sick. So you have a whole crew of people here now who have no pre-morbid history of substance use disorder, never been in treatment before, that are often in their 30s, 40s timeframe, that are now starting to engage in behaviors that by the DSM moves you from a physical dependency to having a substance use disorder or being an addict, because you are displaying behaviors that then move you into the diagnostic category. So you have a wave of people coming in here now with other opiates, rescheduling, changing in prescriptive practices, harder and harder to get a hold of the other opiates. So you can't get the pills too much anymore. You notice as other opiates go down, heroin starts to go up. So you have a physical dependency. You cannot get the medication you need to not be sick. You're going to not go here anymore. You're going to go over to that morally flexible, unlicensed pharmacist outside Chicago Lake Liquors at 3 o'clock in the morning. And for a dime balloon, he or she is going to fix you up with what you need to not be gagging your guts out in the morning. So now, other opiates is not the big thing. Now heroin's starting to pick up. You start to move now toward 17, 18, 18, 19. So now the wave of people coming in are coming in not on pharmaceutical opiates, are coming in on heroin. And we start to notice that it's the same people coming back over and over again. You ever heard of speedballing? Speedballing back in the 70s and 80s was powder cocaine and heroin. It's what killed John Belushi back when Saturday Night Live was still kind of funny. Speedballing in today's world is heroin and methamphetamine. It's just today's version of it. So when you see people that are using heroin, often methamphetamine is involved, especially in certain specific subpopulations. More about that in a little bit. What I want you to take away from this is that, separate of alcohol, the two most common substances you're seeing in Minnesota right now are methamphetamine and heroin, often used together, speedballing. You see the dotted line here? That's intravenous drug uses or out of administration. We have more people shooting than we have ever had in Minnesota in the past. You can talk to any of the syringe service programs. I'm pretty sure you're going to get the same story from them. So route of administration being needles along with the heroin and the methamphetamine plays a role in the amount of mortality. It certainly plays a role in the amount of contagious infectious diseases that are floating around. So the world as you see it right now, that is the ticket in town. No better way to describe it. When we start to look at Minnesota, so I've gone through and I've gone by county of residence at time of admission. In other words, we know what county you're living in because you tell us when you're admitted. So to try to draw an accurate picture to where and the amount of substances being used geographically in Minnesota, we're going by the county of residence at the time of admission, not the county where they're receiving services in. You understand the difference? So we're going for calendar year 2007 and 2018. This is controlling for incidents per thousand. This is a standard method in epidemiology and research where we try to level the playing field. In other words, it takes away arguments about percentages and greater prevalence or something like that. So the rule of thumb here is the darker the color, the more people in that county per thousand of population are seeking substance use disorder treatment in a calendar year. So between 2007 and 2018, you go from about 33.8 to 96.2. That is logarithmic growth. It's not a one-to-one. It's like this. So what I'm telling you is a whole hell of a lot more people are seeking treatment services in 2018 than they were in 2007 for any substance. They're just coming into the system. And again, more and more people, greater recidivism, younger and younger, more and more polysubstance. When we start to look at this by specific drugs, this is the same process. This time it's heroin. 2007, 2020. You go from 2007, where heroin was I say this with a grain of salt, non-existent. It was a very low end. The two biggest areas being primarily Hennepin and Ramsey County at 0.9 per thousand, over here to 13.5 per 1,000. Again, that is logarithmic growth, and that is not a huge span. That's 2007 to 2020. This is bad. When you hook methamphetamine with it, it gets even worse. Same process, same parameters, same everything. 2007 to 2020, you're jumping from 3 per 1,000 over here to 7.5 per 1,000. When you think about the heroin slide and you think about this slide, one of the things you're going to notice is, without exception, even the first slide, the general treatment admission slide, the counties that have the greatest increase, the darkest colors, are counties that are either on or physically contiguous to reservation boundary. Because of that, Native Americans have the greatest disparity for either of these substances compared to general population. So law enforcement data echoes the same thing. This is Minnesota specific. It comes from the VSETs, the violent crime enforcement teams. So they see the same kind of stuff that we're seeing with this huge increase in heroin and methamphetamine. So no matter what door you look at, your clients, my clients are out there. They are seeking service. They are involved somewhere, whether it's law enforcement, mental health, medical, or substance use disorder. They're coming in through different doors. We see the same thing. We just look at it a little bit differently. IV drug use, exact same thing. 2007 to 2018. In 2007, we had about 2.5 per 1,000. Now it's 45.5 per 1,000. I cannot stress to you what a mind-numbing logarithmic growth that is in the use of needles. Along with needles comes all the comorbid medical problems that you associate and affiliate with it. So for clients who have injected, when you look at what substances they're using, you see the same type of situation that plays itself out. You have methamphetamine, you have heroin that hit a crux together about 2017, and they just keep dancing together. Again, the 2021 stuff is COVID, but that is the literal ticket in town. As a general statement, Minnesota is about, based on the Office of the Demographer, based on census data, Minnesota statewide is about 80% self-identified as white or Caucasian. I want to emphasize Native American in this specifically because of the disparity, and a few others here in a minute. So when we look at Minnesota, roughly 80%, give or take, self-identifies as Caucasian. 1.4% self-identify as Native American. How many prisons are there in Minnesota? Make it easy. How many women's prisons are there in Minnesota? One, right? Shakopee. Go to, when you board, instead of looking at Facebook, go to the Minnesota Correctional Facility Shakopee Daily Inmate Report. Native American women make up about 0.7% of the population of Minnesota. How many Native American by percent do you think are in Shakopee? As of this morning, it was 23%. 23% of all female incarcerates are Native. You know what the primary conviction is? Drugs. The average length of stay is about 4.5 years. Now, how does 0.7% of the population make up 23% of all female incarcerates? There's something broken. There's something not right. So when we look at all chemical dependency treatment rates, and I stretched back a little further to try to take out the COVID weirdness. So we're going to go 2010 to 2019, just because that was before the COVID stuff started. When we look at people on admission who self-identify as American Indian, Native American versus non-American Indian. So in other words, this is roughly 1.4% of the population. This is the other 98.5% population combined. When you control for an incidence per 1,000, look at the difference. You've got about 9.9% of everyone who is non-native that are coming into treatment versus 105 per 1,000. It's mind-boggling, the difference between those two. When we start to look at this through primary substances, some people look at this And I've had people try to interpret this as saying, well, this is great, this is wonderful. That means that there's fewer and fewer American Indians coming in for treatment for professional services who have alcohol as a primary substance compared to a fairly static number for the rest of the population. Well, yeah, it is true that fewer and fewer American Indians compared to general population are coming in for treatment of alcohol as a primary substance. But why do you think fewer and fewer are coming in for alcohol? Because of heroin. So remember back on that first map, you had the whole pain is a vital sign. Okay, more and more opiates, pharmaceutical opiates. Okay, we're going to start changing prescriptive practices. More and more people coming in with no premorbid history of substance use. Okay, now they've gone from having intractable pain to having a substance use disorder by definition. Now they're coming back in, and on it goes. Federally, two of the agencies that had bore a brunt in criticism for prescriptive practices are the VA and Indian Health Service. I'm a veteran, so I can tell you when I go down the One Veterans Drive, the big old hospital down there, the ortho line goes down the stairs and out the door. The knee joint pain problems, back when I was in, we still did all our running in boots and all that kind of crazy stuff. That shit hurts. And so a lot of veterans going and are looking for pain relief. IHS had the same criticism, is that it just turned into pill mills for many years. So along with the heroin, remember, as heroin went up, just like the rest of the population, other pharmaceutical opiates went down. So yes, it's true that there is fewer natives coming in for the treatment, coming in for OUD, opioid use disorder pills, because there's more coming back in for heroin. And along with that is, of course, its ugly cousin, methamphetamine. If you get a copy of this thing, print off these last 4 slides and just kind of hold them up to the window or up to a light, and you can literally see the lines trace each other. When one goes down, the other goes up. Other pharmaceutical opiates decrease, heroin increases. Along with heroin increasing, methamphetamine comes along with it. Again, the new version of speedballing. Remember that all of these numbers here and all of these trends, you can easily double and still be at a conservative estimate. These are people who were in the right place at the right time with the right funding source to be able to seek and receive treatment services. Just a couple of more slides I threw in here, just to kind of give you some more background if it's useful for you. So roughly 66% of people admitted into treatment for any substance are male, the rest self-identify as female. Caucasian is about 80% of Minnesota, yet treatment admissions are 66. American Indian is 1.4% of Minnesota, yet treatment admissions by percent is 9.3. So that's a 9-time greater incidence by population for presentation than Caucasians or other races. A little bit more about source of income and things. Are you familiar with the Behavioral Health Fund? You ever heard of it? What used to be called Rule 25? Contrary to popular belief, Rule 25 is still out there. It's just, it's named differently. It's not the Consolidated Chemical Dependency Treatment Fund anymore. It's the Behavioral Health Fund, because somebody decided to change the name of it. So roughly between medical assistance and the Minnesota healthcare programs that include Behavioral Health Fund, we've got about 75% of our clients come in on some form of public pay stream. If you're unfamiliar with it or you want to know more about it, send me an email. I got all kinds of stuff I can send you. Nobody in Minnesota that wants to have treatment services should ever have to not eat to go to treatment. There should never be an argument that I don't have the money. We've got the money to pay. So yeah, there's other things, there's childcare, there's other legitimate things. Lack of funding should never be a discussion in this state, period. We are one of the early MA expansion states. We're 128% federal poverty guideline. If you know somebody who wants services, we'll get them in there. A little over 50% live independently, which also means then that about 16.5% of our folks are homeless at the time of admission. I don't have to talk to you guys about the correlation between substance use and homelessness and all kinds of other bad stuff that follows that same kind of compendium of things. And roughly 65% are unemployed at the time of admission. If you are unemployed, if your income level is 0 at the time of admission, you are automatically eligible for the behavioral health. And again, if you're not familiar with it, send me an email. I'll send you all kinds of stuff we have to explain it to you. If you've been around in the system for a while, you remember when you had to go to the county or the tribe for a Rule 25 assessment, and they waited 20 days to give you the assessment. Then they had another 10 days to make up their mind about where they were going to send you, how long they were going to send you. All that stuff's gone. That sunsetted July of last year. So there is no longer the gatekeeper of the county or the tribe. Individuals enrolled in medical assistance can go directly to the treatment center. If they can do a comp assessment, they can admit you and provide services that day, same day. If you work with our folks, which is probably why you're sitting there, a lot of bad stuff can happen in that 30-day window. That's why it's gone. A little bit about adolescence, because we were all there once. So where alcohol is the primary substance, with adolescents, cannabis is a primary substance. Floating around here, down in this kind of B squad of stuff, you do see methamphetamine, other opiates, and other substances. So yes, there are younger and younger people coming in that are talking about opiates as a primary substance. Right now in Minnesota, we have 16 state licensed opioid treatment programs, or what we used to call methadone treatment programs. Under federal law, you have to document 2 failed attempts at abstinence-based treatment and have written parental or legal guardian, state and federal permission to admit a minor to an OTP. Nowhere else in healthcare do you have some kind of bizarre draconian process like that, but it does still exist. The last time I looked in the central registry, we had 8 minors that had been admitted to OTPs. So when you think about this, in order to have an opioid use diagnosis per the DSM, you have to have a certain number of these symptoms in a certain time frame, 12 months. So it's not like they just got caught with popping a few pills in the bathroom. To fit the literal definition of an opioid use disorder, you have to have a set of symptoms within a time frame. What that tells you is that there are people in high school, arguably junior high, that are sneaking into the bathroom between civics and geometry and popping pills and or heroin. Again, a few more slides just to give you some background if it's of use for you. This is the adolescent version of the adult slide. And before we move into the next chunk of this thing, the one thing that I want to stress to you for what you've just seen, and especially what we're going to walk into here, is every line, every chart, every graph, every chart, every graph, every line, every statistic, every fact, every figure that you see here is somebody's mom, dad, brother, sister, aunt, hero. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of going to funerals. I'm tired of going to needless, senseless funerals that don't have to happen. Pay attention to the numbers, use them for whatever you can, but always remember that everybody up here is somebody to somebody. They're not just numbers. So, when you've seen the last slides here, when you think about what is the definition of an epidemic, and this word gets tossed around a lot in journalism and media, the opioid epidemic, the literal dictionary definition of an epidemic is affecting or tending to affect a disproportionately large number of individuals within a population, community, or region at the same time. And then it gives typhoid as an example. When you look at the disproportionate impact of any of the substances, and for the sake of our discussion, opioids and methamphetamine in particular, on general population, let alone subunits of general population, I will argue until the day I don't breathe anymore that this fits the literal definition of an epidemic. It is not a contagion because I can't catch opioid use disorder from you, because I can't catch amphetamine use disorder from you. It's not seen as important. And because it's not contagious, not as much money, not as much research, not as much of all the other stuff goes to it. Because it's not a contagion, there is still a mindset out there that it is either individual malfeasance, like you somehow chose to be an addict. I don't know about you, but I missed the addict booth at career day in high school. or it's your own personal choices or decisions, or it's a consequence of your choices or decisions. We don't do that with other illnesses. We shouldn't do it with this. So when we start to look regionally, and then we'll shrink down to Minnesota specific stuff, this was the most up-to-date data that I could get at the time when I built this data set. There is some newer, more stuff that's out now. If you would like some of the newer stuff, sign up on my opioid distribution list. As soon as I get it from the feds, I pump it out. So the last information I've got is to about April or May of this year now. So this is a little bit antiquated, but it still gives you the general view of what's going on. So this comes from the Center for Disease Control. We are Minnesota, those guys up there. We are in what is called Health and Human Services Region 5, which is Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, that kind of general corn belt, grain belt, hams, beer area. So when we look at all of this stuff going through, the number of age-adjusted drug overdose rates is 21 to 57. So in other words, we're not quite at the top, but we're higher than we should be, than we could be, than we have to be. We can improve, is my point. We can do better. For 18 and 19, we, Minnesota, and cheeseheads next door, and then the guys down south we don't talk about because they're them, increase. So our numbers have been increasingly going up, as well as the immediate area around here. When we talk law enforcement, the primary distribution route that law enforcement sees for substances into Minnesota comes up through Chicago and also comes in through Duluth as an international shipping port. So it's not really a shock that Minnesota and Wisconsin would share a commonality for the amount, the prevalence, both of treatment admissions, of substance use, as well as mortality that it follows ensuing that. So this is Minnesota specific. This comes from MDH, Minnesota Department of Health. This is off their opioid overdose dashboard. So we start out about 2010, and you see a mild, steady increase, but not a lot. You hit 19 and then 20. What happened in 2020? COVID. Treatment programs stopped taking admissions. Treatment programs shut down. There was not as much street outreach and access. There was still plenty of raw substance floating around. You have people in isolation. You have people using in isolation. Using in isolation equals mortality. I can't be any more direct about it than that. People using alone is why people die. As blunt as I can possibly be about it. The 2021 initial numbers aren't out for publication yet, but I can tell you that they're up there well over 1,000. There's no reason to believe that ski ramp is going to stop. It's a combination of a couple of things. You have increased purity of heroin. You have greater prevalence of cutting agents. Everybody in this room's heard about fentanyl. Everybody in this room's heard about xylazine. If you haven't heard about tiampatine, that's another one that'll be on the radar here fairly soon. Tiampatine has been around for a while. It's an atypical antidepressant that's now found a home in the illicit drug market. And I've been starting to hear some more report now about quinine even mixing into substances. If you're unfamiliar with quinine, it was used for decades as a malaria prophylaxis. One of the things that quinine does is help muscles relax. Like if you go buy charged water at the department store, you can get your club soda water with quinine. It's kind of a selling feature in it because it helps muscles relax. You're not as stiff, you're not as sore. So it enhances an opioid euphoria, and it takes a little bit of the discomfort out of the drug. Consequently, you have people that are starting to mix that in with everything else too. And give it another month, there'll be something new in the drug chain. It's just how the system seems to work. The point of this is that we are at an escalating all-time high, and it's not showing any signs of slowing down anytime soon. So for synthetic opioids, but 55% as of 2019. Mortality with synthetic opioids. Heroin was about 19%. Those numbers are changing very quickly. As soon as the 2022 numbers come out, they'll be on the opioid dashboard. I would strongly suggest if you're into this kind of data or if you make use of this, go find it and just bookmark it, make it one of your favorites. As they change and update stuff, that's their main repository, and that's where all the mortality data comes from. So a couple of features of this is they go through and they create slides like this. And what I want to point out is the banner that they have on the top of this MDH's slide discussing specifically overdose. So in calendar year 2021, American Indians were 10 times as likely to die from an overdose. Black Minnesotans 3 times as likely. And again, just to stress the point of the disproportional impact on Native Americans, 1.4% of the population have a 10 times greater incidence of fatality by overdose than general population. Something is wrong. Black Minnesotans 3 times greater percentage of overdose mortality than general population. System needs some fixing here. Stuff is not right. There's all kinds of thoughts, there's all kinds of theories. We create work groups, we spend millions of dollars sitting around talking about why it is. Fact of the matter is that people got to get out and do something about it. The government will handle all the thinking. It won't be right, but we'll handle all the thinking. Y'all are the ones that go out and make change happen. Go do what you do. Don't ever underestimate the impact you have on keeping people alive. So for overdose demographics, the largest group that we're seeing in Minnesota is 25 to 34 years of age for emergency room admissions for overdose. Now, this mirrors treatment episode data too. Whereas if we pulled this same slide out from say 20 years ago, the bar would be up here. People have the stereotype image in their head of heroin in particular, that the average heroin user is somebody who's about 50 years old, has 3 green teeth, has 15 failed attempts at abstinence-based treatment, they all look like Keith Richards. That is not true. It might have been once, maybe, but it is sure as hell not the case that we have today. So just because somebody is a certain age or a certain demographic, don't get into thinking that that somehow isolates them or makes them, or worse, makes them immune to it. The presenters here this morning did a good job of talking about some of the racial side of it, so I don't want to pound that to death here. I've got other stuff to talk about. But a lot of this, when you look at the socioeconomic and you look at the racial breakdowns of this, people started to get pretty excited about the opioid epidemic when Chad and Barbie started having trouble with it. Minnesota Student Survey. Do you know what Minnesota Student Survey is? So every couple of years, Minnesota Department of Education, Department of Health, DHS, a bunch of us pool money together, and we go and we canvass the schools in Minnesota with this big long list of questions. We ask about everything from academic performance, extracurricular activities, alcohol use, tobacco use, sexual conduct, to drug use, so forth, so forth. And then out of that, the MSS, the Minnesota Student Survey results get published. The last one was published in 2022. So what I want to point out here is in one of the questions that they asked, talks about for 8th and 9th graders who inappropriate use of pain medications, OxyContin, Percocet, Vicodin, within the last 12 months. Within the last 12 months, you're asking an 8th or 9th grader if in 7th or 8th grade they used or misused pain medication. This little red line you see here is 8th graders. So in 2013, you had 0.8%. In 2022, you had 5.2%. People who took this survey in 2013 are out of college already. So the point in this is 8th graders have gone from being the 3rd bracket to the most frequent of the junior high or high school grades that we asked this question of, misusing pain medications. That means more and more people at younger and younger ages. In other words, it's getting worse, for lack of a better way to describe it. When we look at some national stuff, so this comes from CDC, and this was at the time the latest I could get, which runs through January of 2022. There is newer stuff out now that's going to run till probably about April of this year. If you want copies of it, send me an email. You can go to CDC itself, and their website just updates itself. So if you bookmark this, every time there's an update, you'll see it just pop up on your screen. So they went through from January of 15, pre-COVID, into COVID, and now the post-COVID declaration of public health emergency for both predicted and actual overdoses. So even before COVID, there was an increase, and then you have the isolation that came with COVID, lack of access, and it increases almost double of what it had been for years previously. You know, increased escalation here, ski ramp at that point. And this specifically talks about overdose deaths related nationally. I want you to notice that this says United States up here. When we tap Minnesota, Minnesota is more steep than national. Like some of the slides you saw before where it had the maps with the different colors on it. Same thing, 2015 to 2022, the COVID. Minnesota was a fairly static, there was a mild increase, but we were fairly static until COVID. February and March of 2020, the fecal waste hits the oscillating thermal reduction unit, and off it goes. Yeah, I said that. Point in all this is lack of access to services, whatever the service is, more isolation, more use, more fatality. Estimates of overdose deaths, specifically talking about fentanyl, methamphetamine, coke, heroin, kind of the big hot hit parade. This is nationally. Now, this is not just Minnesota, this is nationally. Nationally, people who self-identify as Native American or American Indian or Alaska Native are about 0.9% of the entire population of the country. Yet, for that entire population of the country, they have the highest mortality rate where fentanyl is involved, where methamphetamine is involved, slightly high for cocaine, not their kind of second place, and so forth and so forth. So again, there's something fundamentally wrong when that discongruency can continue, not just at a county or state level, but nationally. We are Health and Human Services Region 5. So Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, this is our area here, just to give you an idea of where we sit in comparison to other areas throughout the country. So we are not the greatest incidence, we're not the lowest incidence, we're somewhere roughly in the middle. There's still room to be better. There's still way too much of this going on. So the latest stat that was available when I built this was telling us that we were quote unquote above average. In this case, above average is not good. This is not Lake Wobegon. There is an aging reference. We're not doing that well. We're not at the height here, but we are somewhere around 0.6% growth compared to the rest of the country. Any growth in this discussion is bad. You want no growth. So before we march into the last chunk of this thing, there's a couple of things I want you to keep in mind as we talk about this, not just right now, but as you go back and do what you do with the clients you work with and the facilities that you work with, is to keep in mind that what's legal and what is clinical are two different things. We can't legislate our way out of any of this, in the same sense that we can't arrest or incarcerate our way out of any of this. We've tried that. We tried prohibition, didn't work. We've tried making things illegal and illegal again, didn't work. So it's not about if something is illegal. We as a society seem to like to demonize individuals when we just choose to demonize them because it's their fault or it's whatever. It's not about helping people, it's about punishing them. So keep in mind that what is a clinical need versus a punitive action. The autonomy of individual choice versus government control. Government statutes, government mandates, rules, regulations are basically instructive. They mandate or they prohibit. So they will mandate reporting of maltreatment of minors. They will prohibit disclosures of certain illnesses or disorders under certain conditions. Between that, you have 13 shades of gray where you have to make some decisions about what you're going to say, who you're going to say it to, how they're going to do it. That is every bit as true for us as the people who deliver services as it is for the individuals receiving. Minnesota is a wide spectrum of thoughts and beliefs about what is the best course of action for people who are using substances. If it's complete and total abstinence directly out of the box, if it's something along the compendium of a discussion of harm reduction to supervised use facilities. And you're going to find as many differing opinions as there are individuals in a room along that continuum. So in the process of having discussions about stuff like this, there has to be a balance struck somewhere in your delivery of service and in the clients that you work with, where there's a choice ultimately on the individual's part how they decide they want services that they're comfortable receiving. We don't get to choke stuff down people's throat. Our role is to try to help people improve whatever they decide improvement is. My opinion. And finally, about the last chunk of this, before I launch into my tirade about other stuff, both of these change as a function of time and location. What is legal or what is proper or what is wrong in one time changes as a function of statute. It changes as a function of community norm. It changes as any of a function of external forces, legal, regulatory, what have you. Things that were completely unheard of 20 years ago are everyday stuff that happens now. I'm old. I remember working in treatment centers when we smoked during group, where it looked like blue haze in the room. Okay, the Clean Indoor Air Act has been around a long time. I'm older than Google for God's sakes. You know, back when we smoked in treatment centers, back when things were the hot seat, if you've been around long enough, that was our preferred method. We put somebody in a chair in the middle of a circle and we would just berate that poor guy until he broke down and started to cry. Because that was then the epiphany that you realized that you were the product of your own bad choices and you just needed to turn your will over to some greater entity than yourself, and then everything was solved. Many places don't think like that. So there isn't a specific guiding set of government regulations or of laws or whatever. Effective August 1st of this year, adult use of recreational cannabis is now legal in Minnesota. Good or bad, right or wrong, it just is. That's going to impact us as a field. What do we do about that? There's still other federal regulations that come into play if you are governed by a federal motor carrier, if you have a federal CDL endorsement or something like that. But the fact is that adult cannabis use in the state is now legal. So what does that mean for us? Does that mean that we still talk about cannabis use disorder? Does it mean that we don't talk about it anymore? Does it take a backseat to other things like some of the other stuff you see going on here? I can't make those choices for you. I can just suggest that you start to think about it, because if you haven't had this quandary come up to you yet, you're going to at some point fairly soon. In the current edition of the DSM, you have 10 different categories of substance use disorder. You have alcohol, caffeine, cannabis, hallucinogens, inhalants, opioids, sedative, hypnotic, anxiolytic, stimulants, other than tobacco. Like listening to George Carlin. Remember? Okay. So some of these are legal, some of them are not. Some of them are legal in certain circumstances, some of them are not. Some of that changes, some of it always will. So just keep in mind that legality does not equal clinical effect. Just because something is illegal does not mean it's going to specifically damage you. If you don't know what I mean by that, catch me when we're done and I can go into a little bit more tirade about it. My point simply is, because something is illegal or illegal doesn't mean it's the end of everything. Read between the lines. Okay. A couple of things quick, and then I want to get on to what I wanted to say about stigma. In 2007, there is a British publication called The Lancet. It's similar to what we have in America, the Journal of the American Medical Association. So The Lancet went through and they tried to create this multi-axial equation to try to describe what is the physical harm or decay of a substance and the speed of what at that time in vocabulary was substance abuse or substance dependency. It's older language now, it's outdated. So they went through based on what was going on at that time for samples of different substances. You've got what was at that time considered kind of minor stuff, things that weren't that physically harmful or not that quote unquote addictive. So you'll notice down here, you've got stuff like cannabis, khat, steroids, solvents, inhalants, etc. You move up there to the top, you've got cocaine and that half bubble being heroin. Back in 2007, at least in Minnesota, what the DEA and the BCA will tell you is purity samples of heroin in Minnesota around that time frame would have been about 30-odd% pure. In today's world, they're about 80-odd% pure, along with all the extra cutting agents and extra adulterants that come along with it. My point being, if you tried to take this same study and replicate it today, that heroin bubble would be somewhere up on the roof, because you're going from 30-odd% purity to 80%, which explains a lot of the unintentional overdose and mortality. You have younger and younger people who don't have a long-term understanding of substances, how to use them, how to come down, how to take care of themselves. You have unwanted or iatrogenic overdoses because you have younger and younger people who simply aren't that familiar with it, and increasing instability in the drug supply. In the back there, some of the vendors had fentanyl test strips, xylazine test strips, which are now legal, by the way, after August 1st. Have people, talk to people, the folks you work with, test their stuff. Test it, test it, test it. If you die, there's nothing left we can do to try to help you. The biggest thing you got to do is stay alive. You guys, I probably don't need to spend a lot of time with this because you're very familiar with most of this. So as you go through days, you have ups and downs, and this is how me, Mr. Chemistry, tries to explain substance use, intoxication, withdrawal to the general public and others. So as you go throughout your days, you have ups and you have downs, you have highs and you have lows. This is true for you physiologically, it's true for you psychologically. It's just how we're built. So you have normal, mean, or average. Normal or mean or average is the product of all of these ups and downs and highs and lows, just divided by frequency. It's literally the mathematical average. So in healthcare, in medicine, in physiology, you have resting blood pressure of 120 over 80, 98.6, all that physical stuff. In mental health care, we talk about mood and affect. If you're elated, if you're euphoric, if you're sad, if you're blue, if you're depressed, whatever this waves that make you, whatever that happens to be. So over time, these ups and downs and highs and lows, you have things like the joy of Friday afternoon, the unspeakable depression of Monday morning, the joy of payday, the horror of April 15th, whatever that is for you. As you start to engage in better living through pharmaceuticals, highs get higher, lows get lower. So over time, the body is consistently trying to be in normalcy or balance. So over time, with repeated application, you develop a nice fancy term, tachyphylaxis. For our term, it means tolerance. You ever worked with people who say that they don't know what it's like to not be stoned, high, drunk, buzzed, or under the influence? Over a function of time, that literally is a true statement, people, because you've spent enough time using, recovering from the effects of use. As you develop tolerance, you have to escalate use. You have to take stronger versions. You have to take more of it. You have to mix it with other things to get the same type of effect. So over time of up and down and high and low, you get over into this area. There's a term in pharmacology called therapeutic window that I'm going to shamelessly steal here for a minute. In therapeutic window, you'll have things that are ED and LD, effective dose and lethal dose. Effective dose is how much you need to take of something to have the targeted effect. Lethal dose is taking too much of it. It's mortality. So over this up and down and high and low of intoxication, withdrawal, you get to a point where normal or mean or average changes for you. And you hit a point where the effective dose, how much you need to get out of being in withdrawal, and how much is lethal, how much will kill you, becomes a finer and finer window. Again, which is why you see so much lethality and so much mortality these days. People get to a point where they're not using for the intoxicant effect anymore. They're using to just try to get out of being dope sick. And for a lot of folks, that's a functional definition of addiction. So what little time I have left, my tirade about stigma. Stigma. I personally believe that stigma is if not the propelling force in a lot of what's going on today. The mortality in particular, the stuff associated with mortality. So somewhere between truth and lies, you find stigma. And stigma is always based on projection and always based on denial. That doesn't happen here, that happens over there. That's not us, that's those people. That's not this here at this time, that's that group, that's those people. It's always something else and somebody else's fault, reason, doing, undoing. It's never about what's going on. There always has to be something projected off about it. So here's an example. If you go into a public school, you're going to walk in, you're going to see an AED on the wall, right? The defibrillators. Nobody ever gets huffy about that. There's an AED on the wall. They check the batteries every year. Good to go. About 10, 15 years ago, kids have bee sting allergies. Kids have peanut allergies. We better have the nurse have EpiPens in. Okay, yeah, that's good. That makes sense. Okay, there's all these opiates floating around. Maybe we better start having Narcan in public schools. Whoa, back that horse up. We can't have that. Well, why not? It's a pharmaceutical intervention for a medical condition. Well, that would mean that students here might be using. I got a news flash for you. Students here are using. Did you pay attention the last hour and a half? Look at all the slides. Yeah, people are using. And it might just not be Johnny or Susie in 10th grade. It might be one of your staff. You want to polarize a room quickly? Talk about Narcan in schools. Here's a bigger one. You want to polarize a group quickly? Talk about a mandate to put Narcan in treatment programs. We had to literally pass laws this year to make public schools and treatment centers have Narcan in. That's the amount of denial there is about this. Nobody wants to talk about it. It's the monster elephant in the room. When you have to pass a law to put a life-saving medication in easy access that you hope you never have to use. You want it to sit there and expire so you can just replace it. That's how strong this is. It just is. In my world, again, in the treatment world, 12-step movement, the anonymous movement, whatever you want to call it, is still very strong in Minnesota. Not good, it's not bad, it's just a statement. When I go around and I do stuff like this, or I'm in different groups, or I talk to different treatment programs, I hear a lot of reasons why we're not going to do this, why we're not going to do outreach, why we're not going to talk about it, why it doesn't need, or worse, why it doesn't need to happen here, because that's not us, that doesn't happen here, that's not our people, that's not what have you. And one of the interesting ones that I've heard time and again is, well, we're an anonymous-based program, 12-step, we're an anonymous-based program, and so to respect the idea or the concept or the process of anonymity, we're just not going to talk about it. Okay? There's a difference between anonymity and silence. Anonymity says the messenger is not that important. Silence says the message isn't important. There's a huge difference. Don't confuse them. And I don't mean to be preachy at you. I apologize if that's how this is coming off. There is a huge difference between the message and the messenger. The messenger is not that important. Whoever says it, it just has to be said. And the longer people bury their head in the sand and don't want to talk about any of this, the worse it's going to get. Don't confuse anonymity and silence. They're two different things. Here's my cool person test. Of these 4 people up here, upper left, who can tell me one of them? If you know 1, you're pretty cool. If you know 2, you're fairly hip. If you know 3, cool, party on. If you know 4, we should party. Okay, we'll come back to him. The God himself. Lizard King. Okay, Brian Jones. Most of you know at least some of these people. And yes, I really should update some of my references. I know. My point is, everybody knew at least a couple of these, right? Okay. What is the commonality that they all share? They all died from a substance use disorder, specifically an overdose. Arguably with some other stuff going on. But there was substances involved at the time of death. Okay. People know who these are. Can you name any of these people? If you've been around Minnesota in the last 20 years, you've seen these same pictures on a lot of billboards, on a lot of different presentations. Nobody in any of these I've ever done can yet tell me the name of any of these people. Now, these are people that have a substance use disorder. These are people that have a substance use disorder. How come we glamorize these people and demonize and vilify these people? How come they go to jail and prison or die? How come they get a buyout card for their behaviors that are substance related? Because they're rock stars, because they're movie stars, because they're entertainers, because whatever rationalization we use at that moment. These folks get a pass for the same condition that these people go drop a dime for the governor for. How come is that? I don't have an answer. It's just a question. It tells you that how we view substances changes. And it's discongruent. Okay. Continuing my cool person test. How many of you remember The Rose? Movie 78, 79, somewhere here. Okay, how many of you know who that is? Bette Midler, right? The Rose, the movie, won like 8 Oscars or something, is loosely based on the life of Janis Joplin. Okay? So we have a singer, well-known singer in her own right, make a movie that wins like 8 Oscars based on the life of Janis Joplin. How did Janis Joplin die? Heroin overdose. So we make a movie that glamorizes this life and this lifestyle to the point of mortality, gets all kinds of press, all publicity. She wins an Oscar. All this is great. Money, you know, all the fame and fortune and everything else. You know who this person is? Same thing, was on billboards all over Minnesota for a while. Same condition as this person had. Is there any movies or Oscars about that person? No. How come it's different? How come it's different based on your name? How come it's different based on what color you are? How come it's different based on what gender you are? How come it's different based on what part of Minnesota you come from? How come it's different? In summary, if you didn't hear her, in summary, how come it's different than if it's pharmaceutical pills versus heroin? Because one's an addict and the other might have gotten it from a pharmacy via prescription, via something else. To me, that's another example of the same thing. How come it's different? I'm not going to kill you with the math. I just want to make a statement here. Do you know what an actuary is? Okay. You probably, whether you know it or not, you've dealt with actuaries. If you have auto or home insurance, you've dealt with actuaries. Actuaries are people that calculate loss. They calculate risk and revenue as a function of loss. Actuaries also exist in healthcare. Actuaries exist for a variety of purposes. Actuaries exist in mortality calculations as well. If you've worked with the state, if you've dealt with the state, if you've got money from the state, you know that we like math and we like numbers. You ever written a work plan for a grant? You should be entitled to compensation if you had. So as an illustration, the point of this that I want to drive home is that we get to a point where we start to talk about acceptable attrition. You write a work plan. Last year in this county, we had 100 overdoses, lethal mortality overdoses. So in our work plan this year, we're going to have 75. We'll reduce it by 25. Groovy. End of the year, you do that. You reduce it by 25. So you reduce the overdoses by 25. Awesome. What does that mean? That means you accepted 75. People died. And we get to a point where we start to anticipate it. We make a volitional, active statement that we will accept 75 people dying if we can save 25. Saving 25, awesome. Keep going. But don't be willing to accept 75. That's still 25 people that don't see the sun come up again. That's still 25 people whose friends and family are going to be affected. We get to a point where our acceptance of a certain amount of mortality becomes apathy about it. We're willing to accept a certain amount of lethality. And we got to get out of that mindset. I work for the government. I'm the guy who calculates this kind of stuff. We got to get out of the mindset that there is such a thing as an acceptable attrition, that there is an acceptable rate of overdose deaths. The only acceptable attrition for a situation, a condition that is 100% preventable should be 0. End of sentence. I'm almost out of time here. Your job pays you for your time and effort. Employers do not fund, nor can they create commitment or dedication. You all bring that to the table. So the next time the hours are long, the money is not enough, and the politics suck, don't forget who you are and why you do this. You all came here today to make an investment. You came here to make an investment in the health, in the well-being, in the life of somebody that may never see your face or know your name. Don't lose that. Thank you.